Actually, I'm doing this video in part because I'm tired of hearing all these insults, the so-called bastards, and at the top, I see often jazz musicians like Miles Davis, which, out of context, are labeled as the greatest monsters that music has known. And I think that without contextualizing the life of artists, we really cannot really throw labels or even diagnostics without understanding the context in which they lived. Miles was not unique in his dark period after World War II. Like many Black Americans were fired when the white Americans came back from the front. And he found himself out of gigs, and dope was around. He got hooked, and he often lived out of women who were sex workers. But that doesn't mean that he was a pimp beating them up and demanding cash from them. Obviously, there are cases of misogyny and violence against women, which was much more frequent in that period, that he acknowledges. One thing about him is his brutal honesty that few other musicians show. And his brutal honesty includes himself. So he's not afraid to show his darkest aspects to a certain extent, or much more than other contemporaries. If we are going to call names at Miles Davis, we first should look closer to home before trashing a genius for being so honest. Another aspect is that once you're an artist with a very strong reputation and enough money, you basically can say what you want. And some weren't that established do it same way because they don't have any control by anyone. That's the typical case of the a small employer or the businessman, medium or small or big. Uh, they are free because they don't have bosses. And in the case of artists, they have a lot of people listening. So that makes them more outrageous. Sometimes it helps their reputation. Sometimes it just makes their opinions better known. But because they are independent to a certain extent, they don't have any control. Sometimes that goes against their own interests, like in many young, kind of not fully mature young men that found themselves very rich and very famous very fast. And they commit acts that later they may regret, but the truth is nobody can control them when they are at the top. In some aspects, it can go against their own best judgment. For example, Nirvana's Kurt Cobain refusing medication. Who is going to tell him you have to take medication? With his level of success, basically, he can do whatever he wants. Somebody who depends on their family to survive, if they've been told by a psychiatrist, take this medication, they probably would do it. So here you go. I don't know, bastards, I think it's an insult and a misguided insult because there's no reason to discriminate against people who have no known fathers or mothers. Reputations close to home, in my view, in the UK are much worse than Miles, or at least same. And whether real or exaggerated by the press, they show traits of sociopathy, Machiavellianism, or narcissism, the so-called dark triad, that they show in their public personas, in their behaviors, and that are revealed through the people who work with them. Let's view a few that I think should be considered before demonizing Miles Davis. Why not John Lennon? He was definitely narcissistic and manipulative with his first wife and son. He also appeared to be showing a tendency towards cruelty in his put downs uh, mm, uh, of George Harrison at times. Mick Jagger, all his business savvy, shows a degree of Machiavellianism that is very uh, manipulative, sidelining bandmates like Brian Jones or Mick Taylor when apparently they were not so useful. And he's a complex character because he is really more of a Fabian than a right-wing fellow, as he should be given his cash. He's also obviously a narcissist because of his numerous affairs show a complete need for feeding his ego and a great need for admiration that seems to have no boundaries, and which is totally out of understanding, in my opinion. Then somebody like Keith Moon looked a little bit sociopathic because his extreme behavior, although being self-destructive, like destroying hotels, driving cars into pools, the violence, suggests a disregard for the welfare of others. That's pretty serious. And also the so-called self-destructive narcissism that puts others in danger. He seemed indifferent of putting others in danger and himself. By the way, there is also a shy narcissism that could very well apply to Alan's Holdsworth, which I don't know, and that's totally speculative, but thinking that one is totally unique, that cannot do the same of others, the super perfectionist may reveal belief of one's uniqueness or superiority, or so not all narcissism is obvious, uh, self-aggrandizing, aggressive uh, behavior, need for uh, admiration and constant um, ego, big ego statements and resentments against all of those that don't fall in line with their egos. Jimmy Page also, he was very manipulative and controlling, especially in his 20s and 30s, with his relationship with that underage girl from the biographies. I think her name was Maddox. And that has been very criticized. And definitely he had superego that drove other bandmates upset because his vision was extremely strong. Pete Townsend also had explosive rages, outbursts that seemed to uh, signal a little bit of narcissism. His constant fights with the um, uh, with the bandmates, and um, he was accused of hypocrisy in his personal dealings. I will not go into details, but then so people don't think I only signal certain ideologies, because that can be in any ideology. Roger Waters has been accused of Machiavellian control of the band that culminated in lawsuits against David Gilmour. Then, of course, Morrissey from the Smiths, known for his feuds with Johnny Marr and statements racist, anti-immigrant, and self-victimization, all into a kind of soup of narcissistic-like and manipulative behaviors, and total lack of remorse, not apologies of any kind. The great Ozzy that we lost, certainly his extreme substance use, the animal decapitation, the violent outbursts, exaggerated or not, seem show a total disregard for others. And he had also a manipulative charm in his persona that he used as a brand over the decades. So, and of course, the Liam Gallagher, I mean, narcissistic behavior, obviously, this violence, the fights with the brother, the journalist, lack of empathy, that's who mocks others people's struggles. For example, he made fun of mm, Damon Albarn's depression. Uh, Another one, maybe the first manipulative and cruel, Brian Jones. He was into all kinds of mind games, jealousy, abusive behavior, uh, not to talk about Sid Vicious or uh, Eric Clapton in the drinking period. Of course, it's very difficult to know some of these behaviors because they are very influenced by substance use. So it might have uh, do more with substance use than with any underlying personality. In the case of Eric Clapton, his manipulative relationships and right-wing outbursts of the 70s slowly disappeared, and he actually changed a lot. And in spite of having lost friendships such as the great Robert Cray, he turned around, and his racism and anti-migrant rants do not occur. In fact, his views seem to be much more humanistic in some sense. And that came with sobriety and with constant interaction with his daughters. So good for him. Uh, that's really valuable when you can change. And it's very difficult when one is young, famous, and rich, and can do whatever they want. So this also was reinforced by the culture of excess of the 60s, 70s, 80s that was glorified, encouraged, admired, while later that has disappeared. Um, uh, so these are just some of these cases that from the British rock uh, and that I believe should have been taken into account before uh, getting very aggressively into miles and contextualizing the situations is always necessary. One mistake that Andy always makes, and it's terrible, is calling Jacko narcissistic. It's pretty clear from the biographies and other sources that most likely he seemed to have psychosis, bipolar type, um, with manic and depressive episodes. Um, so that a label are narcissistic that has a negative connotation is very inappropriate for such severe mental disorder. It gives a bad name, reputation to the artist, when in fact the problem was that he wasn't uh, treated properly. Maybe he don't want to, but in any case, today he could have been treated and he would still be playing. One good example of the progress of psychiatry in managing severe mental disorders is Tom Harrell, one of the top jazz trumpeters of his generation, who has one type of psychosis, I think schizophrenia, and with treatment, he still can play like one of the best in the world by his appearance in rankings. So it's time to forget about the stigma of mental illness. Andy also said something that's not true, that the people with psychosis were like basically like in the Hitchcock movie, that they were violent. In general, persons with mental disorders are more likely to be victims than perpetrators of violence. Of course, if somebody who has a psychosis in an environment that's violent is likely to engage in violent behavior that, without control, can be um, particularly dangerous. But in general, people who have severe mental disorders are more vulnerable to violence from people who do not have uh, mental disorders than the other way around. So I just wanted to clarify this because it's very sad to hear kind of insulting bastards and so on. Persons like Miles or Mingus was surely bipolar, whose contexts and life we really do not know. And if we study it, it very well can explain their behavior. Definitely, Miles' violence and misogyny was very much linked to his substance use periods and alcohol, for example, and uh, we have all kinds of uh, antisocial or dark triad type of personalities among young rock stars for all the reasons that I mentioned before. One that I forgot is Sir Paul McCartney, who apparently manipulated Michael Jackson to obtain the rights to the Beatles catalog. I'm not saying this is true, but several sources claim that that's what happened. So here you go. Even the most pristine character has flaws. First, they are all human, and second, they are in a position which is very difficult not to fall into behavior that's damaging to others due to their money and power, at least for a little while. Thank you.